This day came a lot sooner than I thought. As I thought of all the different ways that I would want to conclude this what the final thoughts were that I would impart onto you, or what could be said, God just really laid on my heart a message that seems so simple at times, and something that He's reminding me of, and I believe He's reminding us of today. Go ahead and turn to Numbers 13. We're going to be in Numbers 13 as well as Numbers 14. So essentially what we have here is that, so we know that the first 5 books of the Bible are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So in Genesis we have the creation story, we have everything that happened, we have the fall, we have the outworking of that. We have the story of Joseph, the narratives of his, from Abraham to Joseph, and then we end off with Joseph serving and leading in Egypt. And we begin the Exodus book of the Bible with the reality that now a Pharaoh has come that did not know of Joseph. And he's looking at the Israelite population that are living there, and they're growing in number. And he realizes that the Egyptians actually could be overtaken by the Israelites at their growth rate. And so Pharaoh decides to turn them into slaves. And so they become slaves, and for 400 years, the Egyptians are masters over the Israelites. And the Israelites are growing out and crying out to God, and nothing's really happening. But God has, from the very beginning, promised that He would deliver His people. And He raises up Moses, and Moses, the edict is out that all firstborn, or that all males born are to be destroyed, and Moses' parents hide him, and after they've hidden him, he is thrown down the river in that beautiful basket, and Prince of Egypt, and alligators, and crocodiles, and piranhas, and who knows what else. Anyways, he goes down, ends up in Pharaoh's palace. And the princess sees him, Pharaoh's daughter, and oh, there's a cute little baby, and decides to keep him, because who doesn't want to keep a little baby? And in the end, Moses lives, raised as the Prince of Egypt, raised in Pharaoh's house. And he sees his people. Obviously, ethnically, he's different as a Hebrew. And he sees a Hebrew being beaten by a slave master, and he tries to settle the dispute and ends up killing the Egyptian and tries to hide the body. The next day, he sees 2 Hebrews fighting, and he's trying to intervene. And they're like, what, are you just going to kill me like you did the last guy? And he's terrified, runs out, hides in the desert, and then God meets him there. 80 years old, calls him back to Egypt. Calls him back to Egypt to release and to bring deliverance to the people of God. We know the 10 plagues, all of this stuff happens. It's terrifying, whatever. They come out, they pass through the Red Sea. God miraculously splits it. They walk on dry land. And all of these things are happening. Manna and quail. Throughout Exodus, we read just miracle after miracle after miracle of what God is doing. Go ahead, Steve. And what we have here in Numbers is we finally see the promised land is right there. Numbers 13 says this, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So Moses sent from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of the men who were heads of the people of Israel. We skip down to 17. Simply just because it's a list of names, it's not that they're not important, it's just let's not wrestle through, but one man according to one tribe. 17, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up to Negeb, go up into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether the trees are in it or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. And now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up, that being the spies, and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob near Lebanon. They went up into Negeb and into Hebron. Ahiman, Shishai, Talmai, the descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came into the valley of Eshcol, and they cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between 2 of them. They also brought some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because it's the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. Verse 25, at the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all of the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. They brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land, and they told them, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of Negeb, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Verse 30, but Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with them said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land the which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people there that we saw are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Let's read just a couple verses into 14. Then all of the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we would have died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Let's pray. Father God, as we just come before you today, we ask that you would open up our hearts. They would be soft, that we would be able to receive what it is that you have for us. God, I pray that you would give clarity to me, that you would just allow anything of me to just be thrown away now, and that this would be purified as your word. God, I ask that you would just take our lives, and God, that you would have your will be done. That there would be a surrender to you, that there would be a trust in you that comes from this. In your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. The whole point of this sermon, I'm telling you this right now, just trust God. That is the one thing that I want to get across, is to trust God. When God says something, you can trust it. That is the whole point of the sermon. If you get nothing else, you don't even have to listen essentially now. Just trust God. The outworking of that, though, is what fills the rest. See, here's the thing. The Lord gave a very specific command. He made them great promises. And over a period of a very short amount of days, they saw many, many miracles. Think about it this way. From Egypt to Canaan, 11 days. A week and a half. That was the journey ahead of them. When they were released from Egypt, when they walked and were delivered with Moses by God, 11 days. 11 days. That was the journey that they were called to take into the promised land. 11 days. Now, I don't know about you, but I am probably the most impatient person in the entire world. Absolutely the most impatient. And I've learned that I can coexist with New Yorkers because of this fact. When God says to wait, there is a tension within me to try to make it happen. And I want to shortcut the journey that God has. And to skip over parts and to do this the quickest way, the most efficient way possible. And at times there are moments where I look back and I just say, I wish that I just waited like God had said to wait. It would have changed this, or it would have changed that, or this wouldn't have happened, or this would have happened, or I wouldn't have that extra debt, or I would have been able to think better or differently, or whatever. Go ahead, Steve. The reality that the Israelites had is that they had a very clear command from the Lord and a very clear promise that he was going to take them out of slavery and he was going to bring them into the promised land. an 11-day journey. An 11-day journey of God miraculously providing manna and quail, splitting the Red Sea, water coming from rocks. For 11 days, the journey was to be from Egypt, from slavery, into the Promised Land. And it's not that work was going to be done once they reached the border of Canaan. That wasn't it. That's why they sent spies out. Because they still had to overtake the rest of the nations. An 11-day journey to enter the Promised Land and to begin to receive what had been promised. In our lives, when we read through Scripture, if we actually read through it, God has made some pretty incredible promises to us. I think of John 10:10 when he says that I have come to give life and life to the full. That the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come to give life and life to the full. That one promise alone, that is the promise that God gives us. And then I look at my life at times and I say, God, where is the fullness? Where is life to the full? I don't see it. And I wonder, where is the disconnect? And in our own lives, if we look at what God has promised us, at times when we're in the waiting period, we look and we say, has God forgotten about me? Has God stopped caring? Did he just forget his promise to me? Or is it just I've sinned too much and so now it's gone? And in our lives, we can look at the promises of God. We can look at the journey that he has us on, and we can really disagree with it. It would have been better in Egypt. That word, that saying continues to come back up again and again when the people will begin to distrust God. We would have been better off in Egypt. We should have, we had meat in Egypt, so it was so much better than this nothing in the desert. It would have been better to continue to be slaves than to die here by the sword. This continuous looking back that, it really actually wasn't that bad. The past was better than this, so, it would have been better to have stayed there. And with Canaan right in front of them, the distrust comes again. 12 spies go out. 10 of them come back and they say that this is impossible. Yes, there's this giant thing of grapes that takes 2 men to carry, which that I don't even understand. They can see the incredible richness of the land, and yet they are cowering in front of the people. In front of the nations that are there, they are just giants. And they say, we can't do it. And Caleb quickly quiets everyone and says, no, but we actually can. This is ours. There's no problem. This is ours to take. Let us go at once. Let us take what God has given us. And the people immediately rebel. And the people turn against them. And we read later in 14 that they're ready to stone Moses and Aaron because they're so angry that they feel like they got set up to die. And I don't know about you, but at times in my journey with God, I'm not going to make this pretty, but oftentimes there are these moments that have come. Not every day, but there are definitely 1 or 2 where I look at God and I say, what? This is why you took me here, to destroy me? This is where it ends? That you have this promise that you have for me. You said that you love me. You say that what you have in store for me is good. And yet when I look at this situation or when I look at the circumstance, I say, this can't be it. Is this really all you did? All of those miracles for was at this moment to destroy me. And I can look at God with an accusation and to say, how can it be? And I think if we were to be extremely honest within ourselves and within just between us with God, or even with a select group of friends, we would be able to look back on our lives and to say at this moment, whether it's where I am right now or where I've been in the past, I really question God. Why wasn't the job coming through? Why am I still single? Why am I still struggling with this sin? Why am I hating everything? Why is my family not prospering? Why didn't I get accepted? Why did this happen? Why did the illness come? And we look at these circumstances and we say, God, is this it? That you brought me here to destroy me? In chapter 14, verse 20, it says this, Then the Lord said, I have parted according to your word. And what the Lord is saying is to Moses, because Moses interceded for the people because God was going to destroy them. He goes, no, because if you destroy us now, then you look really bad, God. And so the Lord says to him, I have pardoned according to your word. But truly as I live, as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despised me shall see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Now since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valleys, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. They had seen so many miracles, and yet they didn't trust God. In fact, the word despise. They were so angry at their own deliverance. I don't know about you, but at times when God delivers me, he often does it in a way that doesn't really feel so great or comfortable. Or there's heartache and pain along the way that doesn't make any sense to me. In the same way, when I went through a couple surgeries, this whole idea of a doctor helping me by causing me to bleed and rip into me and to move things around just sounds a little bit weird. It doesn't really sound really great, because you can have the same action done by some axe murderer with an axe or with a chainsaw or whatever, and both of them cause you to bleed, and yet one is for your good and one is for your destruction. The problem that we have is when we look at the healing hand of God, the correcting hand of God, the disciplining hand of God, and we look at him and we accuse him that he's doing it to utterly destroy us. Because the way that he wounds us is to heal us. The way that he works, the way that he corrects, the way that he moves in our lives, it is never to lead us to this place of destruction where we have no hope, but rather to bring us to healing. In the song that we sang, you make all things work together for my good. And we've talked about this before. What is our definition of good? Because if our definition of good, which has crept into the church, is this, that it is what is convenient and what is comfortable for me, if that is what is good, then the majority of our lives we will question if God is really good. Because in a Christian walk with God, when we are constantly following him, there will be tension after tension after tension. There will be discipline from him correcting us, leading us into a pure relationship with him and with one another, and it will hurt at times. And so if we say to God that the only way that you are good is if it's comfortable and convenient for me, we will be completely disheartened, we will be discouraged, and we will feel as if God has utterly abandoned us at times. And we will question his goodness. But if we understand that what God does is good because he is good, that he is sovereign over all of it, and that he can use anything to bring himself glory, if we can rearrange our definition of good to be back to that which brings God glory, then we can endure it, knowing the glory that's ahead of us. See, the problem is that the people had taken their eyes off of what God's purpose was. God's purpose wasn't just to raise up a nation. It wasn't just to have one powerful nation for himself to make a little dynasty in the world. His purpose was for his glory. And what we have here is that we have this people who have seen the promises of God, who have come to this place to understand that he was active and with them, a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire at night. God's presence was so clearly visible there. And he led them, and yet they continuously grumbled against the leaders. They continuously grumbled against what God was doing, and they continuously doubted and questioned and tested him. And then when he brings them into the promised land, when they're right there, immediately they question their strength, not God's. See, they look at their opposition. They look at the reality that there is this upcoming battle that needs to occur. And they feel so defeated because they're so small. Now, here's the thing. If we look at our own wrestling in our own lives, if we look at our own trials, our own struggles, our own tribulations, if we only look at ourselves Every single time we will feel like we are about to be consumed. We can look at whatever that opposition is, whatever that circumstance is, the not having the money, or the impossible family situation, or the harm from others, or the sin that we are constantly struggling with. If we look at ourselves every single time, we will say that this is impossible. Because the reality of what we have been promised by God is this, that apart from Him, we can do nothing. Apart from Him, we can do nothing. It's not that apart from Him, we can do some good things. It's not apart from Him, we can still have a good reputation. It's not any of that. Apart from God, we can do nothing. That's why we're called to abide in Him. And what we see in the Israelites is that perspective that they had was not on God. It was on themselves. It was on how great that opposition looked and how little they were. But the reality in our lives at times is the very same thing. We look at ourselves and we say, what am I supposed to do about this? I can't change this. I can excuse my sin because I can't conquer it. I can look at the pain that happened to me and I can remain super bitter and I'll just hate that person and I'll stay in that anger against whoever it is because there's no other option. That this is too big for God to redeem. It's too big for God to do. And we look and all we see is the storm. All we see is the tsunami wave coming at us that we are going to be utterly destroyed. And my challenge, go ahead, Steve, is this. Put your perspective back on God. That we have an incredible God who is our high priest, who understands and who has gone through the tribulations that we have. That He is able to understand. Where is our perspective? Will we trust God? Because that's what it is. Our perspective is, where do we put our trust? If we put our trust in money, then when we see our bank account or when we see the bills, all of a sudden we will be so completely panicked. It will be, how can I quickly get more money, or how can I, cheat out the church, or, I'm going to just compromise my obedience and tithing so that I have more money so I can make sure I pay my bills or whatever. Or it's in a person, and so when that person fails to meet our expectations, then immediately our idol has come crashing down and we're so bitter and angry at them. As if any spouse or family member or friend or significant other could be that all-sufficient Savior for us. That education, that degree, that profession. Where's our perspective? Because apart from Him, we can do nothing. But with Him, it is possible. Have you ever thought, when Joshua took the people after 40 years in the desert, the first battle that they have is the Battle of Jericho? Do you not find it interesting that God essentially tells them to do nothing but to walk? Which was essentially the biggest sign of trust. But they had to re-go through circumcision, and they were in right there. They were completely vulnerable. And they did nothing. Why? So that God would be able to show them that He was the one who would give them the victory. In our lives, what is it that we need the victory over? My concern is this. Is that we have a very flippant attitude towards our own sin and towards the sin of one another. In this sense, we are no longer horrified by sin. What I mean is this. I don't mean that as soon as we find out somebody is a sinner, we completely condemn them. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that these common sins have become so acceptable in the church. Whether that's gossip, whether that's slander, whether that's bitterness, unforgiveness, whether that's pornography, whether that's sleeping around, whether that's whatever. We are so comfortable with sin that when we even hear about it from anybody else, there is no fear of God within us anymore. We have this attitude to God that says, it doesn't matter what I do because your grace is just going to cover me. So you weren't really serious, God, when you said to be holy as I am holy. God's not expecting perfection, so that means I can just stay where I'm at. That's not what God is calling us to. My first concern is that is that we no longer hold a fear of God in terms of our sin. That at times we actually rejoice in that which is evil. That we are silently approving while evil occurs. Why is that dangerous? Because at some point we will block out the voice of the Spirit. In Galatians, we're told out very, very clearly what a life led by the Spirit looks like and what a life lived out in the flesh looks like. Very clearly. Very, very clearly do we see the two. And far too often, we are more than happy and more than pleased and more than willing to accept a life of sin than to take God seriously when he calls us to be holy. You see, the reality is that oftentimes we're conveniently comfortable in our sin because it brings us some form of immediate satisfaction or pleasure. We're okay with it. Why? Because to actually follow God in obedience and holiness would be extremely difficult and would make us stand out and would cause us to have some hard decisions along the way. My first concern is that we have lost the fear of God when we look at sin, that we far too often delight in that which is evil. We need to trust God when he calls us to live a life of holiness. When we are called to live set apart from the world within the world. Doesn't mean we go hide in this holy little huddle, this holy Korean little circle. It means that we are actively in the world but not of it. And that is going to require a trust in God and a trust in his perspective. That what he offers, life to the full, really is life to the full. My second concern in our perspective is this, is that we have made this idol of what community is to look like, that we reject the gift of community that we are in already. By not trusting God, we continue to put up masks, we continue to put up an appearance of who we are, and yet at the very end, all that it does is keep us in our sin. And we live in darkness instead of in light. The reality of our community is this: it allows us to walk in light. When we are unwilling to be in community with people and accountable to one another, what happens is that we continue to live a life in the darkness. And if we already are struggling with trusting God with the call to be pursuing a life of holiness, all we're going to do is continue to isolate ourselves and fall deeper and deeper and deeper into sin with more and more excuses and justifications. Because what would happen if we actually brought that which is in darkness into light? But the problem with that is this, is that God can't redeem that which we keep in darkness. It goes back in the end to the first theme. Our trust in God is what allows us to pursue a life of holiness, and our trust in God is what allows us to walk in light, even when it means exposing that which has been in the dark. It doesn't mean that we rejoice in it, but rather what that means is we bring it before God so that he can actually redeem it. That's where we find forgiveness. We can't find forgiveness while we're hiding in the darkness. But we bring it into the light so the enemy no longer can use it to keep us trapped, but rather can bring us before God by coming into the light. My third concern is this, is that we look at the trials and tribulations that God calls us to endure, and we just want to tap out and go back to whatever our Egypt was. You know, I think of my time in America, and this is something that I really wrestled with when I was deciding between going back to Canada or not. And it's something that I spoke with my counselor, something I spoke with my parents about, just seeking really how to articulate the tension I felt inside. And what I felt was that I was just doing what the Israelites did. They had to go back to the wilderness. Or what the disciples did when Jesus died. They went back to fishing. See, in a lot of ways, our journey, whatever God calls us to, often is not what we expect. And it wasn't until God so very clearly called me on Saturday, that one day, that it was time to go home and to leave there. That I finally was able to let go of what I thought my past should look like, or what I wanted it to look like, or what I thought was best, or what I thought God was doing. And I put down my roadmap, the way that I had established my life and my expectations, and I laid it before God and said, I trust you. We have a tension, is to go back to the way it was before. To go back to that which is familiar. To go back to that which is comfortable, whether that's our sin, whether that's a safe job, whether that's a relationship, whether that's an attitude in our heart, whether that's to bury our heads in the sand and just pretend that nothing is happening around us. That place of comfort, that place of convenience, is a place that we often run to. There's a numbing that we do so that we don't feel the pain or the hurt of whatever is going on around us. And it's very easy to justify. It's very easy to say this doesn't really matter or this doesn't concern me, so I can just bury my head and pretend that nothing's happening like an ostrich. But when God leads, will we trust him? So the third thing that I'm concerned about is when God is really leading us to something that's unexpected, or something that isn't very glamorous, or to something that isn't very comfortable or convenient, what will we do? Because often what we do is we tap out. We say, I'm not gonna follow him anymore. I'm just gonna I know that he's calling me to this, but I'm just gonna take a step back, and I'm gonna back up and away from this situation, or away from that job, or away from that education, or whatever, that relationship. I'm just gonna step back. And it's not that it's just not making any ripples. It's essentially what we're trying to do. But that's not the way that we're called to walk out. The first concern in our trust in God is that we don't actually trust when he calls us to a life of holiness, that is life to the full. The second is that we don't trust God in the gift of community around us because we've built up an idol of what perfect community should look like, and so we just stay in the darkness and we refuse to bring anything into the light, which means that God can't redeem it. The last one is that when God is leading, if it doesn't make sense or it's not comfortable or convenient, that we just tap out. Been really blessed to spend over a year and a half, almost 2 years here in the area and just in the midst of you guys. There have been celebrations. There have been just some incredible moments there. Let's not forget the weddings, or yosabi, graduations, acceptance letters. And there's been some sorrow. People lost. Disappointments. But my question is, what are we clinging to? Go ahead, Steve. What is it that we're holding on to? What is it that we're willing to put ourselves on completely? If all you cling to is NYPPC, that's not enough. This isn't about trusting a church. You can't actually securely hold on to a church, or to a church leader, or to finances, or to a job, or to a spouse, or to a future ambition, or to a dream, or to even the call of God. You can't hold on to any of that. You have to cling to God himself and to trust him. Because that is what is going to carry us through the whole way through. That is what is going to allow us to be faithful when it hurts. That is what's going to allow us to remain faithful when the money isn't there, when it's not very comfortable. It's what's going to allow us to walk in light instead of in darkness. It's what allows us to speak the truth into situations
where the enemy has been echoing lies again and again and again. It is what allows us to pursue instead of backing away in relationships. It is what allows us to die to our pride, to apologize, to repent. It is what allows us to live in dependence upon God instead of on ourselves. Because the reality is that if we cling to anything other than God, when that opposition comes, we will be overwhelmed and consumed by it. We have been promised by Jesus Christ that in this world there will be trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. You see, for the Israelites, they had to go through the battles. They had to walk into the land with the promise that God was going to give it to them, but with the present reality that the giants were still there. And their perspective was wrong. They took their eyes off of God. They took their eyes off of the incredible testimony that they had of being delivered out of slavery. And they looked at themselves and were like, I'm inadequate, I can't do it. If we trust in God, that fear of God will be there with our sin, where we will not rejoice in that which is evil. That we will not remain silent when God gives us a voice to speak up. We will have the courage to confront that which is horrible and horrendous in the world, knowing that God can redeem and justify it. It is what allows us to look at one another and to give grace and forgiveness and to allow the Spirit to work and to bring into light what is going on in our lives. Well, I'll never understand how we all feel like we are the only messed up person in the room when every single person is feeling like that. Every single person has the relationship tension of anger or bitterness, or they feel expectations are too much for them, or they don't know what to do and they feel paralyzed, and so they just freeze there and they just back up because it seems so overwhelming by themselves. And yet, what we have is a God who understands and a God who is the one who makes the victory. And He is the one who enables us to overcome. And at times what we cry out for is incredible deliverance. We ask for the Egypt moment. We ask for God to split that Red Sea and to allow us to walk through it. We ask Him to pull us out. And very often what God is calling us to is to endure it. To endure it and to look to Him and to continue in Him. My concern is that we will never grow individually or corporately if we don't actually trust God. We know all the answers. We have all of the tradition of church. We know what to do to look like we're okay in this room. And yet, what we refuse to do is actually to surrender it to God and trust Him to move in it. The only reason that we shy away from that which is true about ourselves or about one another is because we actually don't trust God. The reason why we shy away from situations that seem impossible is because we don't trust God. And so we have all of the greatest of theology. We can have all of the right answers. We can have all of the right roles, titles. We can go through the motions. But if we don't trust God, when that push comes to shove, when we have to go into the promised land to attain what God is calling us to, we back up and we say, I don't want to do this. It would have been better in Egypt. I was better in slavery and in my chains of sin than to live life to the full in a life of holiness pursuing God. That is what we continuously do. And that is not the way that we are going to grow. That is not the way that we are going to see the glory of God around us. And the Israelites who didn't trust God, who said, oh, we're not doing this, we can't do this, we're going to tap out, they weren't allowed into the promised land, that they had to die off before the next generation could take it. And so my fear is this, is that we as a generation are becoming that. That we look at impossible situations, we look at hard circumstances, we look at our sin and we say, we can't do this, so we tap out. And we say, somebody else will lead the victory. Somebody else will go and have the victory. Somebody else will conquer the sin, but I'm stuck in it. I'm stuck in the impossible situation, and then I'm lost in my sin, and God can't redeem me. But what we are called to do is to walk forward trusting Him. To walk forward trusting the truth of the gospel, that what God has for us is good, no matter how hard it is. But it means that we lay down this messed up view that comfort and convenience is the call of God. Because that's not the call of God. And we also have this other pendulum swing where we say, my life is just about suffering. I will never experience victory. But that's not the truth of God either. We don't have this perfect life, and we don't have just a life full of suffering. And though at times we may pass through the valley of the shadow of death, what we have is we do not fear, for my God is with me. We declare that his rod and his staff, that which pulls us when we're going astray, his discipline is what comforts us. That he actually doesn't let us stray so far that he can't reach us. And at times when we look at situations or we look at people, we say they are too far from the hand of God to move. This situation is too far out of God's sovereignty that he can't transform it. And what God is saying is, trust me. Follow me in this. And watch what I will do in you and in one another. And in this situation. And it's not about us, it's about his glory. So what are we holding on to? What is it that we've closed our hand around that God is saying, open it up? What is that thing that we go before God and it's still in our hand and we want God, but we also have this, and so we can't have both? If God isn't Lord over it all, he's not Lord at all. That's the tension. Because far too often what we have done is we've said this, I'm okay with getting out of hell. I'm okay with having the promise. I'm okay. I'll even sacrifice my Sunday mornings or whatever. And, I'll go to retreats and I'll serve and I'll lead, or, I'll keep showing up because that's what's expected of me. And what we miss is life to the full because we aren't pursuing God. My concern at the very end of the day, the reason why we are not experiencing life to the full with God is because A, we have this weird messed up idea that comfort and convenience is the call of God, that is what is good. And so when something hard comes up, we tap out and we're like, I can't do this. Or we look at the cross, and our cross is just a tiny little statue that has no real power. That Jesus' life, death, and resurrection is too small for our sin, or it's too small for somebody else's sin. So there's no hope. But that is not how we trust God. We will never experience the full life that God has called us into until we realize that we need to trust him and let go of everything else. See, here's what, when Jesus was talking about calling people to follow him, and the guy says, let me first go back and bury my dad. And he says, unless somebody hates their mother and father and comes after me, they are not fit for heaven. That tension there, what he's saying is that even the most intimate of relationships cannot come before God. And I think that if we were to be really honest, that's where we hit it. That's where we hit this tension in relationships, is that we forget who has to be first. Our perspective has to be put on him. And that's where this huge root of bitterness and anger and frustration can come, that causes us to push everyone else away, or to push that one person away and to say, I'm not going to fix this. And we stay in our pride, not trusting that God is actually big enough to transform it. My prayer for us is that we experience life to the full. And life to the full in this world right now, in a very broken world, is not going to be perfect. And there's going to be pain. There's going to be disappointments, and there's going to be broken promises, and there's going to be hurt and anger, and things may never go as we expect. But in light of all of that, God is still good and worthy of praise. That he is trustworthy. And if we hold on to him, what we have is still eternity. And what we have is the ability to go into the presence of God and to see the glory of him fill the earth. See, what our perspective change will be is the difference of only seeing the storm, of only ever seeing the pain, and never being able to have the joy. We can numb ourselves to the point where we feel nothing. But even that in itself is a prison. The enemy can use that against us. And so what my prayer is that we would be able to experience life to the full, and the only way we do that is by trusting God. Trusting Him, the fear of Him, the way that we conduct our lives, the way that we trust Him, the way that we walk out our faith, the way that we deal with situations, the way that we deal with sin, that we would trust Him. That what He says is trustworthy, sufficient. No matter how, at times, crazy it sounds. That we would be a generation that would not just tap out, but we would be a generation that actually pursues God. Let's pray. Just humbled once again that you love us. God, that you do call us, that you do have plans and purposes, that you have ordained all of our days. God, that we can declare that you are good, and that is just an established fact and characteristic and trait of who you are. And God, we just ask for you to reveal to us just a greater sense of your presence and of your glory. God, that we would trust in you. God, knowing that you are the one who died on the cross to satisfy the wrath of God against our sin, that forgiveness is fully there for us, God, that your cross is big enough for us and for one another. And so, God, in surrender and in an act of maturity, God, would we release to you all of those burdens? All of the bitterness, all of the anger, God, we release that to you. And God, I pray that you would work in our hearts, that we would be people who forgive. God, that we would not take lightly the forgiveness that we have received, but rather, God, we would realize just how real the cross is for others. God, and how real it is for ourselves. God, I pray that as you have called us to live a life of holiness, and at times we have been very, very blatantly just rejoicing in evil, and we've been delighting in sin. God, I ask that you would remind us so clearly, God, that you have called us to live a life of holiness. And God, that you would then give us just the sensitivity to your Spirit to actually walk that out. That we would understand that our joy is established in following and in obedience to you in a life of holiness set apart for your glory. So God, would we give that to you? Would we walk that out? God, we lift up to you just the road that you have us on, God, that paths turn and change and things happen that are unexpected. But God, would we continue to trust you in the midst of it all, knowing that what you have in store for us is good. God, I ask that what we cling to wouldn't be one another, it wouldn't be to a future dream, it wouldn't be to our education, our family, our finances, but God, that it would be really just to you, not some leader or church, but God, that we would really find ourselves centered, holding on to you. For when we hold on to you, we are able to let your grace flow from us to others. We are able to walk in courage when the situation seems so bleak, and we are able to have joy, and that we are able to continue to have strength to go each day, God, even if it's just moment by moment, knowing that you are the one who brings the victory. God, I pray that we would live not in light of just today, but God, rather in light of eternity, of your presence and of your power, God, that you are a God who is forever, and that you are not going to abandon us or forsake us. And so, God, I ask that even when we don't sense your presence, even when the emotions aren't there, that, God, we would continue to preach the truth to ourselves, that we would continue to remind ourselves of the gospel, that we would walk in light of your truth, God, even when we don't feel it. God, I pray that you would lead us as a generation into just incredibly healthy marriages. God, that we would deal with our junk now, that we would bring into light what's been in darkness, that we would die to our pride, that we would be able to be a generation that would bring you glory in our families.
God, would our pride be first being dealt with our siblings and with our parents and with roommates or our spouses, God, and even with Jess and Eusebi, God, asking for you to be there. God, that we would be able to be a generation that would be able to serve and to honor and to bring you glory through our marriages and through our jobs and our education and through our giving and through our sleeping and in our rest and in our vacations and in our joy. God, that you would be the center of the glory of it all. So God, would we just at the end of each day be able to hear you say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And God, where we fall short of your glory, reveal to us your grace. But God, may it never be an excuse for us. God, would we be people who pursue you and pursue intimacy with you, which would bring the death of our independence for the intimacy with you.